If you could just take a deep breath for me, okay? I understand this is stressful, okay? All I want to do is try and get an idea of what you heard, what you saw, and any timeline, any information that you can give us so that we can try and figure out what happened, okay?
She was asleep 10 feet below where 4 of her friends were being murdered. She heard something. A sound she thought was a firework sparkling under her door. She heard a dog barking. She thought someone was making food in the kitchen. She went back to sleep. By the time she understood what had actually happened in that house, it was already over. Her name is Bethany Funke. She was a roommate at 1122 King Road on the night of November 13, 2022. She survived the night Bryan Kohberger walked into that house and killed Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. And what happened to her after she survived is a story that almost nobody has told completely. Because surviving that night did not protect her from what came next. The internet found her. Strangers made up stories about her. Death threats flooded her phone. The media showed up at her family's house. She was grieving 4 of her closest friends while simultaneously being hunted by people who had decided she was somehow responsible for what Bryan Kohberger did. In this video I am going to tell you the full story of Bethany Funke, what she heard that night, what she did, what she did not do, why she did not call 911 immediately, what happened to her after, and what she said at Kohberger's sentencing on July 23, 2025, the first time she had spoken publicly since the murders. Words so raw and so honest that they silenced a courtroom. Stay with me, because this is the story of what surviving looks like when nobody prepares you for it. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because this channel is covering every development in the Kohberger case as it unfolds. The sentencing documents, the newly released police interviews, the details that only came out after the guilty plea. If you are following this case and you are not subscribed, you are missing the full picture. Hit subscribe now. And comment below before we go any further. Did you know Bethany Funke's name before this video? Because most people who followed this case closely know Dylan Mortenson's name but not hers, and the reason for that difference is part of this story. Let's start with the night itself. Because to understand everything that came after, you need to understand exactly what Bethany Funke's experience was on November 13, 2022. The house at 1122 King Road was a 3-story, 6-bedroom off-campus rental. Bethany's bedroom was on the first floor, the ground-level east side of the house. She was the only person whose bedroom was on that floor. Above her on the second floor were Dylan Mortenson's room and Zana Kernodle's room, where Zana's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, was staying that night. On the third floor were Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen. That layout matters, because it means Bethany was physically the furthest from where the murders happened. 3 floors separated her from Kaylee and Madison. 2 floors separated her from Zana and Ethan. The night before the murders, November 12th, the housemates had a normal day. Taco Bell in the afternoon. Naps. Parties that night. The kind of Saturday a college student in Moscow, Idaho spends without thinking twice about it. Bethany went to bed. Kaylee and Madison were out late at a bar, then stopped at a food truck for carbonara before heading home. Zana and Ethan had been at a fraternity party. Everyone was home by the early hours of November 13th. Everyone was in bed or heading there. Then somewhere between 4 and 4:25 in the morning, Bryan Kohberger entered that house. Bethany was asleep on the first floor when it happened. What she heard, the sound she described to police less than 10 hours later, sobbing in an oversized yellow hoodie during a 28-minute body cam interview with Moscow Police Sergeant Dustin Blaker, was this. Something that looked like a spark under her door. A sound she thought was a firework. Murphy barking. That was Kaylee's dog. And then what she thought was the sound of someone falling, followed by the assumption that someone was in the kitchen making food and had knocked something over. She called out or tried to reach people. No one answered. She tried calling Zana, then Madison, then Ethan. No answer. She tried Kaylee. No answer. She thought they had all just gone to bed. Think about that for a moment. She tried to reach 4 people. 4 people who were at that moment already dead or dying in the rooms above her, and she interpreted their silence as sleep. Then her phone lit up. Dylan Mortenson was texting her from the second floor. Dylan had heard something too. Dylan had opened her bedroom door and seen something she could not fully process. A figure in the hallway. A man in what she described as a ski mask almost, wearing black, walking toward the back sliding door. Dylan texted Bethany. Bethany texted back. The texts are documented in court records, and they show two young women trying to understand in real time what they were looking at. Typos growing more frequent as the panic rose. Dylan's phone was about to die. Bethany texted her, "Come to my room." Dylan came downstairs. She walked past Zana Kernodel's bedroom on the second floor and saw Zana lying on the floor. She thought Zana might be intoxicated. She kept going downstairs. Bethany and Dylan locked themselves in Bethany's first-floor bedroom. They spent the next several hours trying to reach their roommates, calling, texting, getting no answers, telling themselves there had to be an explanation, that their friends were just asleep, that whatever Dylan had seen in the hallway was nothing. At 7:30 in the morning, Bethany called her dad. At approximately 11:58 in the morning, Bethany called 911. That is nearly 8 hours after the murders occurred. 8 hours, and that gap of 8 hours became the detail that the internet seized on and used to destroy her. Subscribe right now if you are not already subscribed, because the next part of this story, what happened to Bethany Funke after she called 911, is something that deserves to be heard in full, and this channel is the place covering it with the honesty it deserves. And comment below right now. Before I tell you what happened to Bethany after, I want to know what you think about those 8 hours, because your answer before you hear the full context and your answer after may be very different things. Here is the full context. Bethany Funke was a college student who woke up to sounds she could not identify. She was on the bottom floor of a house where nothing visible to her had gone wrong. She could not hear screaming. She did not see anything. She heard a sound she thought was a firework. She heard a dog bark. She tried to call her friends and got no answer, which she interpreted as sleep. Dylan Mortensen had seen something in the hallway, but what Dylan saw in that moment, a figure walking away toward the back door, was not immediately recognizable as a murderer leaving the scene. It was a person in the hallway of a house where 6 people lived, and where people came and went. Dylan herself, who had the closest visual encounter, did not immediately call 911 either. She texted Bethany. She came downstairs. She locked herself in a room. She spent hours trying to process what she had seen before she could put it into a category her brain could act on. This is what trauma does to human cognition. It does not produce clarity. It produces paralysis. It produces the desperate search for an innocent explanation, because the real explanation is too catastrophic to process without first exhausting every alternative. By the time Bethany called 911, she was not hiding something. She was not covering for anyone. She was a 21-year-old who had spent the night and most of the next morning trying to convince herself that her 4 closest friends were just asleep in their rooms. And when that explanation finally collapsed, when a friend who came to the house went upstairs and found Zana and Ethan with no pulse, she picked up her phone and called 911. That is not suspicious behavior. That is human behavior under conditions that no human being is prepared for. Bethany Funke's own statement made this clear. "I was still out of it, and still didn't know what happened," she wrote. "If I had known, I of course would have called 911 right away." The internet did not accept that explanation. Within days of the murders, online communities that had built entire theories around the case decided that Bethany Funke's behavior was suspicious, that her 8-hour delay meant she knew something, that she was involved, that she was covering for someone. Some accounts posted her personal information. Death threats came, painful messages from people who had never met her, who knew nothing about her, who had constructed a narrative about her behavior in the worst night of her life, and decided that narrative made her guilty of something. "I was grieving, numb and unsure if what had happened was even real," she wrote in her sentencing statement, "and at the same time I was getting flooded with death threats and painful messages from people who did not know me at all." It did not stop at her phone. The media harassed not just me, but also my family. People showed up at our house. They called my phone. My parents phoned other family members' phones, and we were chased while I was still trying to survive emotionally and grieve. She was being chased while she was trying to grieve the 4 friends she had just lost, while she was still in shock, while she was still trying to understand what had happened in the house she had been sleeping in hours before. This is what the internet did to a survivor of a mass murder. Comment right now. Because what happened to Bethany Funke after that night is something that almost never gets discussed in the coverage of this case. The focus stays on the evidence, on Kohberger, on the investigation, and Bethany Funke is left as a footnote, a name mentioned once and moved past. I want to know if you think that is right. Now let's talk about what Bethany said on July 23, 2025 at Bryan Kohberger's sentencing, because it is the first time she had spoken publicly since the murders, and she chose not to appear in the courtroom. She sent a written statement that was read aloud by a friend. The choice not to appear is itself meaningful. Dylan Mortensen appeared in person. She sat at the prosecution table and read her statement through tears and faced Kohberger directly and said words that the courtroom will not forget. Bethany chose not to be in that room. After everything the public and the media and the strangers on the internet had put her through, standing in a packed courthouse and being watched and photographed and analyzed one more time was not something she chose to do. She sent her words instead, and her friend read them. Never in a million years would I have thought that something like this would have happened to my closest friends. I not only lost some of my best friends, but I also lost a sister. I was still out of it and still didn't know what happened. If I had known, I of course would have called 911 right away. I still carry so much regret and guilt for not knowing what had happened and not calling right away, even though I understand it wouldn't have changed anything, not even if the paramedics had been right outside the door. She understood that calling 911 sooner would not have saved them. The forensic timeline confirmed that all 4 victims were already dead before she and Dylan even started texting each other. There was nothing she could have done differently that would have changed the outcome for Kaylee, Madison, Zana, and Ethan. And yet the guilt stayed. I still think about this every day. Why me? Why did I get to live and not them? For the longest time, I could not even look at their families without feeling sick with guilt. Survivor's guilt is a documented psychological response to living through an event that killed others around you. It is not rational. It does not respond to evidence. The evidence told Bethany that she could not have saved her friends. The guilt told her something different. The guilt told her every single day that she was the one who lived when she should not have, and that the people she loved most in the world were gone, and she was still here. And that did not make sense, and would never make sense. I hated and still hate that they are gone, but for some reason I am still here, and I got to live. Then she described what the aftermath had done to her body. I can't breathe. I can't think. I can't stop shaking. It's far beyond anxiety. It's my body reliving everything over and over again. My nervous system never got the message that it is over, and it won't let me forget what he did to them. Her nervous system never got the message that it is over. That is not a metaphor. That is a clinical description of post-traumatic stress disorder. The body's threat response system remains activated long after the threat has passed. It cannot distinguish between the memory of danger and actual present danger. It keeps the person in a state of hypervigilance indefinitely. Sleep disturbances, panic attacks, the inability to stop scanning every room for exits, the inability to be alone, the inability to close her eyes without her brain pulling her back to that night. Bryan Kohberger did that to her, not just to the 4 people he killed, to Bethany Funke, who survived, who was asleep on the first floor, who heard a sound that she thought was a firework, who spent 8 hours trying to convince herself her friends were asleep. He did not kill her, but what he did to her life, what he set in motion that night, is something she will carry every day for the rest of her life. Her statement ended with this: I still speak to them in my prayers every night, and I will continue to live in their memory. Everything I do it with them in mind. I hope that they are remembered for who they are, and not what happened to them, because who they are were so beautiful, and they deserve to be remembered in the highest way. I hated and still hate that they are gone, but for some reason I am still here, and I got to live. And then she added one sentence about Bryan Kohberger that she delivered without using his name even once throughout her entire statement. She said she will waste no further words or thoughts on him. Kohberger sat at the defense table in an orange prison jumpsuit throughout the sentencing hearing. He sat expressionless. He did not react to any of the statements, not to Bethany's words read aloud by her friend, not to Dylan Mortensen's tearful address from the prosecution table, not to Kaylee Goncalves' sister, who told him directly that if he had not attacked them in their sleep, Kaylee would have kicked his ass. The courtroom applauded that. When the judge gave Kohberger the opportunity to speak, he said 3 words: I respectfully decline. Nothing else. No explanation. No apology. No answer to the question that has hung over this case from the beginning. The question every family member and every surviving roommate and every person who has followed this case for 3 years wanted answered. Why? He declined to answer. He will spend 4 consecutive life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole, and he chose to say nothing to the people whose lives he destroyed. Bethany Funke said she will waste no further words or thoughts on him. And then she said something in her statement that was not about him at all. She talked about her friends. She listed what she believed were each of their most admirable qualities. She called Zana and Ethan's relationship proof that storybook love is real. She was the only person in that courtroom, present or represented by written statement, who was in that house on the night of November 13, 2022, and survived, and chose to spend her words on who those 4 people were, rather than on what was done to them. Subscribe right now, because this channel is going to continue covering every aspect of this case, including the newly released police documents that only came out after the guilty plea, the body cam footage of Bethany's police interview recorded less than 10 hours after the murders, and whatever comes next in the aftermath of Kohberger's sentencing. You do not want to miss any of. Subscribe and hit that notification bell. And comment below, after everything you just heard about what Bethany Funke experienced that night and what happened to her after, do you think the internet owed her something it never gave her? Because I think this is one of the most important questions this case raises, and I want to hear your answer. Bethany Funke was asleep on the first floor of 1122 King Road when Bryan Kohberger walked into that house. She heard what she thought was a firework. She went back to sleep. She woke up in the same world she had always known. She has not lived in that world since. She speaks to Kaylee, Madison, Zana, and Ethan in her prayers every night. She does everything with them in mind, and her nervous system has still not gotten the message that it is over. I'll see you in the next one.